Welcome to another installment of the Global Health Education Summit. This month we are taking a look at the process of death and dying and the opportunity to reframe it as a rebirth. Much of the catastrophic mistakes that we've made in Western civilization that have led to the comprehensive behaviors of extraction, destruction, consumerism as a whole concept perhaps, I believe stems from one of the fundamental changes that we made in our history as we started to let go of our reverence and, in fact, excitement for this extraordinary chapter of life that has become such a flashpoint of fear in the lives of people in many civilizations, in many societies in the last couple thousand years. If we take a look at the root cause of where the fear of death comes from, I think that it actually stems, perhaps ironically, from our definition of nature. If you look in the Oxford Dictionary, nature is defined as the minerals, the animals, as opposed to humans. And so we literally use that language of opposition of humans against nature. And so in this bizarre way, we've writ ourselves out of the definition of nature, leaving ourselves with this reality and perhaps philosophy of scarcity. Scarcity of wealth, scarcity of power, scarcity of ultimately life. And we start to see it as this finite thing and we fear the end of it. But if we dig back into our indigenous roots, no matter what part of the globe you come from, whether it be native tribes of the Caribbean all the way to the Norwegian and Scandinavian northern parts of Europe, all the way into Russia, to China and beyond, regardless of the origin of those roots, we find extraordinary histories, written and otherwise, that held in great reverence this concept of death. We see huge reverence for the death and dying process, the burials, the song, dance, chant, all of this around the death and dying process, the rituals that were put in place. We see incredible history of reverence for our ancestors, and we see them as living beyond some expiration date, and we see their effect moving and changing us as human beings long after they passed out of these bodies that we call the living body. And so we have this treasure trove of trust and clarity within us that death is not an endpoint, but it is actually an opening of a deeper connection into maybe not even our own wisdom or our own consciousness or some greater self-identity or expansion of our energy field or all of these, but actually maybe emerging with the fabric of the universe, the complete creation story of energy within a dark universe and its organization into planets and stars and solar systems, galaxies, and the rest. That richness is within us. We remember the reverence. We remember death without fear. And it is always extraordinary for me as a physician to move a patient a couple inches closer to that reality that there is no fear at the end of life. There is a release, there is freedom, there is a rebirth process that we move into. And if we reframe it that way, we can see the process, that birthing process, begin in our elder years as we move into our wisdom years and we start to have our eyesight fade. We have skin and hair and all these physical features. Our neuromuscular system starts to collapse. All of these are symptoms of a body that are starting to disconnect from a sole purpose that will move on beyond the frail and short lifespan of that physical body. And so as we dive into this topic of death and dying, I'm excited to bring you perhaps to a place where you can start to reconnect, dig your roots into that knowingness within you, your indigenous knowledge of the vitality that is within death, the rebirth for sure, but this transformation event, this metamorphosis of energy that happens in those moments that we let go of these physical bodies. I'm going to bring you a panel of physicians, nurses, and also a death doula that is an important piece of the team that you might decide to create for a loved one or for yourself in the future as you move into a more conscious approach to the death and dying process, so that you can actually experience it as a rebirth, as a new beginning in your consciousness and your, in fact, existence. And so as we look at this death and dying topic this month, and from these different perspectives of experts that are there in the operating room, as we bring you Dr. Guy Danielson, a neurosurgeon who practiced neurosurgery in the operating room for 49 years, the number of bodies and minds that he touched quite physically. Few things are more extraordinary in your medical school and residency journey than watching your first brain surgery. Watching a portion of the skull removed and this hallowed ground of the brain exposed, and realizing just how humble and actually benign and devoid of magic in some ways this gray mass within the brain. It seems too normal. It seems too expected from the horror movies and everything else you've seen. Like, you've seen a brain and it actually looks just like the brain in the horror movies. You expect something more from a living, vital brain than what you experience in those operating rooms. And so I'm excited for you to learn from Dr. Danielson some of the extraordinary things that have happened in that operating room, to make him aware that even in the living form of his body, he can transform in a moment, and something bigger than himself can occur in that physician-patient relationship when you're in these near-death, rebirth experiences within the operating room, and a soul hangs literally in the balance between connected and disconnected from that physical body. So we'll explore that life within that death process, that balance that happens within the operating room. We'll explore then with our pathologist who's joined us a number of times, Dr. Peter Cummings, in looking at the dead bodies. It's so interesting how so many of our physicians who move on into the field of pathology will spend more time with corpses, with dead bodies, than they will with living patients. And they learn so much from that journey. And I believe that Dr. Cummings is a good example of somebody who has emerged from that field, not understanding more about disease and the death and dying pathology, but learning more about the importance of living vitally. And as he's moved into education to youth and adults alike around sports medicine and topics of brain health and brain injury, Dr. Cummings will give us a glimpse of what life looks like on the other side of that body and its connection to soul. And we will take a look then with the possibility of putting a team together proactively, if not in real time, then in the right moment, as a loved one or family member or yourself begin that transition where you start to know that this letting go process is going to occur, this opportunity to engage that team around you. And I'm excited for you to meet Michelle, our death doula, who's got an incredible experience that has brought her into that space as a practitioner, but also the insights that she's gained from the possibility that this is a glorious event rather than something to be feared. And so as we introduce you to these members of a hospice team that will curate a journey with you and with your loved one towards an endpoint that is anything but fearful, it is in fact hopeful that there is life beyond these frail bodies. And what has largely been relegated historically to religious beliefs and religious teachings, science and the medical experience, especially in the extremity of places like the ICU, have given myself and tens of thousands of other physicians and family members, and in fact patients, this extraordinary opportunity to transition back and forth across that veil once, twice, sometimes multiple times before the ultimate death moment where they completely let go of this frail body and move on to that other side. And the stories that come back to our nurses and our hospice teams as people transition across that veil multiple times, give us a glimpse of a scientific journey into what is energy, what is a soul, what is the spirit. All of these things, which historically have been kind of poo-pooed in the pharmaceuticalized world of Western medicine as esoteric or religious or just spiritual quackery, whatever it is starting to come front and center. And in a year like the past one that we have had with a global pandemic and hundreds of thousands of deaths from a seemingly surprising and vicious disease that we had never defined before leaps out us, and we see this process unfold, and it induces fear in us, and it reinforces our sense of disconnect from nature. And so as you dive in with me and my colleagues in the panel discussion around death, dying, and the rebirth process, I hope to inspire you to write yourself back into nature. And in so doing, I think you will find that the belief of scarcity, the whole fear of scarcity, whether that be the fear of a lack of love, or you're not giving enough love, or you haven't given enough to your children or spouses or communities or whatever it is, all of those senses of failure that can come out of that scarcity event of disconnected from nature are solved by that reconnection. And I believe that death and dying as a topic and as a philosophy could transform the way that you think about the way that you live today, and the way that you sense the environment around you, the way in which you stay engaged with those you love, the way in which you pursue new experiences to find new sources of beauty in your lives, new connections with people you haven't met before, tastes and smells and visual experiences that just titillate that human capacity, and perhaps unique human capacity to sense the moment, to savor it, and to gain so much joy and pleasure out of that moment. These are the things I hope to ignite in you with our incredible panel at the Global Health Education event this year and this month. And it's going to be a fun journey, I believe, in the end, into a topic that you may never have thought of as holding so much hope and so much joy and so much expectation for freedom on the other side of it. So join us for Death, Dying, and Rebirth at the Global Health Education Summit, and invite your best friends, invite your loved ones, because I think it's going to spur on some extraordinary conversations among you, and it's going to give you the opportunity to begin to prepare a intact philosophy for yourself on what you want in that rebirth process, and what kind of team and what kind of subjects and what kind of proactive action would you like to take in those last weeks and months of your life, when all of the frivolous things that we pursue and distract us fade away rapidly through this poignant moment when you get that diagnosis, or you get that message from the physician, or you hear deep from within yourself at that core level that this chapter is coming to an end and a new one is beginning. Who are the people you would connect with at that time? What are the messages? What are the letters you would write at that time? Not only will that premeditated journey prepare you well for doing that last chapter beautifully, you might find out that you might write that letter 20 years earlier to the person you would most want to connect with in those last minutes of life. And you may live a new chapter before moving into that rebirth process. And in this way, I think that the death, dying, and rebirth process, when done correctly, reminds us to die every day. To die to ourselves, to die to our self-identity, to die to our to-do list, and to remember to rebirth, to let go of the past in such a way that we would erase the traumas and the broken expectations and relationships and everything else that may have defined your life, letting go of all of those quick enough so that you can grab a new chapter of life and live vigorously in this chapter for a more beautiful and vital future, not just for you, not just for your family, but for humanity at its tipping point, as we wonder whether we will slip into that extinction event in these decades to come, or step into a new reality, a reconnected reality with that Mother Nature that we are surrounded by. Excited to be with you. Can't wait to engage the entire panel, and the wisdom and the experiences that they've had, I think, will blow your mind on many levels, to the point where you may find yourself in an intuitive space that had previously been filled with a fear state that was distracting and misinforming the way in which you are living your life today. Excited to be engaged, and I look forward to your presence there. Your Q&A is always stimulating, and your engagement in the support of the Global Health Education Summit has allowed us to reach tens of thousands of people around the world with life-changing information in these past months. And so I'm just so grateful to each of you for building this community with me and for staying engaged, for the hours that you give us in that community and the conversations that you carry away from those experiences to change the environment around you. Thank you for staying engaged. Thank you for being part of this team. And thank you for giving me hope for that brighter future that we all want.